Okay, good afternoon. So 3 years ago I set 10 challenging targets for the public service. They included reducing long-term welfare dependency, supporting vulnerable children, boosting skills and employment, reducing crime and improving interaction with government. We set these targets to stretch the public service to get better results from the more than $70 billion of taxpayers' money we spend each year. We owe that to New Zealanders, many of them from vulnerable families who rely on those public services. The targets fit neatly with the government's investment approach to social services. We're willing to invest a bit more upfront to improve people's lives and to get better results. Today, Cabinet was updated on progress against 3 targets. I'm pleased to share some of them with you. Overall, we're heading in the right direction. For example, in the last 3 years, participation in early childhood education has increased from 94.7% to 96.1%. The proportion of immunised 8-month-olds has increased from 84% to 92.9%. There's been a 14% reduction in people being hospitalised for the first time with rheumatic fever. The percentage of 18-year-olds with NCA level 2 has increased from 74.3% to around 81.1%. For Māori, this has increased from 57.1% to 67.7%. And for Pacifica students, those with NCA level 2 has increased from 65.5% to 74.9%. Welfare dependency continues to fall. That means there are 42,000 fewer children living in benefit-dependent households than there were just 3 years ago. But there's much to do if we are to achieve all of these targets. For example, further reducing rheumatic fever will be challenging, and the previously rising number of assaults on children has flattened out, so we need to do more if we're to achieve the target. Setting targets and publicly reporting on progress is keeping ministers and agencies accountable. It's another example of this government's willingness to try new things and to work across agencies for the benefit of New Zealanders who rely on our public services. We'll continue to provide updates every 6 months. As you will have seen this morning, Jerry Brownlee and Stephen Joyce issued a discussion document setting out proposed changes to the Earthquake Commission Act. Following the Christchurch earthquakes, the changes are aimed at better positioning homeowners, the EQC and private insurers to recover from natural disasters. The proposals include removing contents insurance from EQC so it can focus on insuring homes. As the ministers have said, public submissions will close on September the 11th before they finalise a reform package. We then expect to introduce legislation early next year. On Wednesday, as many of you know, I'll be travelling to Samoa to join Prime Minister Tuilaepa and watch the first All Blacks Manu Samoa test ever to be played on Samoan soil. Samoa and New Zealand enjoy a special relationship which includes a shared love of rugby. Over the years, a number of Samoans have contributed to our All Blacks success, and it's great that the New Zealand Rugby Union has been able to give back to the Samoan community in this way. While there, Prime Minister Tuilaepa and I will also be able to build on discussions we had in Apia last year on a range of political and economic issues. Questions?
Prime Minister, the ANZ today put out a note suggesting that growth looks like it's slowing and that the government should look at using its fiscal tools to promote growth, and so it's basically suggested give up on your surplus target.
Yeah, so the first thing is tomorrow, I think it is, the 11-month accounts come out, and you'll be able to see those for yourself, but I think you'll see they're reflecting quite a strong set of accounts. Effectively, whether we make or whether we make the surplus target or not is now essentially dealt with, if you like, in so much that it was for expenditure and revenue up until the 30th of June. Now, we don't know those numbers, so we don't know whether we'll make it or not, but essentially whatever is going to impact on those results is essentially, in pipeline now and it's been accounted for. So I don't think you would give up your surplus target, for that. I think, the question is what impact does it have on future surpluses and future growth? I mean, I think the point, I haven't read the full report, but the point the ANZ is making is the right one, of course, is the government needs to be counter-cyclical. So in times where the economy is slow, even if tax revenue is coming down, the government should be spending more money. And I think you saw us do that in 2009, 10 and 11 with more money into a whole range of different initiatives and more money, for instance, into infrastructure spending. I mean, in the end, we'll see how growth goes. I mean, it may well slow down a bit because of China or maybe what happens with Greece and Europe or ultimately dairy prices. But we're still reasonably optimistic actually that growth will remain at a robust enough clip, and we'll see how it all goes.
So you're saying though that if it did slow to a point where you were worried, you would spend more if you needed to.
We've done that in the past, and I'm quite confident we'd do that again. But the main point that we've got here is that one of the reasons you try to get back to surplus and you live within your means and you reduce the amount of debt that the government has, all of those initiatives are done to ensure that if that rainy day comes along, you are actually prepared to and in a position to be able to spend money. So absolutely we would do it again if we needed to. But at the moment, I'm still confident that we're going to work hard to try and get a surplus for the 14-15 year.
So how would you go about doing that? Would you expand the new spending provision?
Well, we're a long way away from sort of even considering that. But yeah, the way we did it in the past was how quickly can you get it directly into the economy. Infrastructure spending is always seen as a positive thing to do because it's reasonably immediate and also has a positive impact on your long-term growth outlooks. But there are lots of options.
Because essentially they're saying that monetary policy needs mates on the upside as well as the downside when you're trying to stimulate the economy. You accept that, do you?
Well, I think what they'd be arguing, again, I haven't read the report, but I suspect what they're arguing is, given how low base rates are, you don't have a lot of room to move in terms of interest rates because you can't make those big substantial cuts. If you go back to, say, for instance, when we took over, just before we took over, interest rates in New Zealand have been peaking at about 8.5% from a base rate point of view. They got all the way down to 2s or 3s, whatever it was. So there was a substantial reduction in base rates, and the point they would be making is, given where we are at the moment, we don't have a long way to go, and there's not a lot you can cut.
But they also say, they may well be making that point, but they also say that while monetary policy does some of the heavy lifting, the government and local government have got good, strong balance sheets and can effectively stimulate the economy through fiscal means. Do you accept that?
Yes, and I think what the action that we took in the first, let's say, 5 years of being in government was to essentially have a very low levels of new budget spending component. So we spent more money in automatic areas, and we spent more money in health science and education. But fundamentally, we kept our expenditure reasonably tight. We spent more on infrastructure, but our new budget spending operating balance was basically zero. And the reason we did that was that put us in a position to have a much stronger balance sheet than we otherwise would have had. So I think the Treasury in the early days when we came in was predicting the debt to GDP would rise to about 60% by about 2020. Now, of course, they're saying debt to GDP will top out about over 26%.
So are you really signalling today that if you were going to stimulate the economy through further spending, you do it on the capital side, you do it through investment in infrastructure?
No, to be fair, I think I'm saying we haven't considered any of those measures, but what I am saying is that I agree with the ANZ. In the times where the economy is slow, the government's proper role is to be counter-cyclical, but to put yourself in a position to be able to be counter-cyclical and spend money when the private sector is not, relies on the fact that you have a strong balance sheet, and that's the actions of the last 7 years have been to put us in that position.
Well, I don't want to labour the point, but are we there now? That's really the point they're making. It's time to start considering it.
We're certainly not. We certainly wouldn't want to be spending additional resources over and above the $1 billion we've allocated yet. I mean, for a start off, growth is still robust at the moment. And yes, while dairy prices are slowing down, and who knows what's going to happen as a result of Greece, I mean, if you look at it, we've still got a very robust economy. Auckland and Christchurch are strong from an infrastructure spending point of view, housing and other infrastructure. If you look across the agricultural sector, red meat's strong, tourism's very strong, wine's been good, kiwi fruit's strong. So dairy is 5% of our overall economy roughly. It has an impact, but you wouldn't want to overstate that impact, and you certainly wouldn't want to be pulling the sort of panic switch simply because dairy prices are down a bit.
So this obviously won't affect the 2014-15
No.
because all that spending has been done, but
Yep.
The 2015-16, obviously if you were to take the kind of action that ANZ were talking about, that would be put that surplus in jeopardy if you extended that spending, say for instance on infrastructure.
Yeah, so I mean, for want of another way of describing it, 14-15 is banked. It'll be what it'll be, and we'll find out. You're right, 15-16 can be affected in a couple of ways. Does government spend more money, and does government receive less tax revenue than it would anticipate because if the economy slows a little? Maybe, but we're just not nearly as negative as they are, and certainly none of the official advice I've seen supports that view. And Treasury and Reserve Bank aren't coming over to us and telling us that, Houston, you've got a problem. Actually, at the moment, they're reasonably confident things are going well.
So you could expand that spending cap for 2015-16 to, say, for instance, invest in infrastructure, if that's what.
If in the end the government felt it had to respond, it's going to govern for the conditions it finds itself in on any one given day. We're not so ideological in our view that says that we can't change our spending parameters. It's just simply that's not what we think we need to do at the moment.
So how worried are you about the events in China over the past few days? And is there any danger that Chinese investors in New Zealand may seek to liquidate those investments to cover their positions at home?
Is that this $50 billion reduction in net worth?
Yeah.
China is a much more significant issue to New Zealand than Greece. There's just no getting away from that because China is a far more influential partner. It's a big driver of global growth. Greece is the sentiment story, I think. I mean, it's I think our 74th largest trading partner. I'm not terribly worried about China. I still think it's growing. It's probably not growing quite the clip that we would like, but I think generally speaking, it's growing okay. But obviously, when we look into the crystal ball and say, you know, what are the big factors we would worry about, China is always an important factor, like Australia is, because they're just such an influential part of our economy these days.
So how much lower would growth have to go before you started to think about a fiscal response?
I don't honestly know the answer there. We take advice on it, but you know, if you sort of try and transport yourself back to 2009 and the sort of discussions, actions, and things that we did then, you could see how serious the global situation was, and you know that was a fully blown global financial crisis when we weren't even sure where the world was going to end up. We're just so far away from that at the moment. I think we're, frankly, I think the ANZ are a little bit ahead of themselves.
We've had Bill English call, you know, the economic conditions right now concerning, was the word he used, and Stephen Joyce has said it's going to be bumpy. That's his term.
Yeah.
What's yours? You know, is it concerning, is it bumpy? What
Concerningly bumpy. Look, I am not at all panicked about what I see in the economy at the moment, but I accept there are a few headwinds there that weren't so prevalent a little while ago. But I really urge people to, you know, take a deep breath. I mean, yes, dairy prices are down a little bit, but there's a lot of other factors in our economy. I mean, as Minister of Tourism, I probably don't spend enough time talking about it, but our tourism numbers are through the roof. You know, our red meat sales, go and ask any beef farmer in New Zealand what they think the price is at the moment. Kiwi fruit's been immensely strong, wine numbers have been very strong. You know, right across, you know, you look at Auckland, I mean, it's had the biggest number of consents, I think, since 2005, the most building activity. There's so much in the way of large construction that still hasn't even started yet. It's going to start. So we're a long way away from the feeling of 2009. It's just coming off, arguably, much higher levels than it was.
Do you think that, given the no vote, that Greece is going to have to leave the Eurozone?
Well, in the end, it'll be a matter ultimately for, you know, the members of the European Union. Now, I think scheduled I think it's a G7 meeting as well, you know, tomorrow. I mean, I think in the end, as I sort of said this morning, something's got to give. I just can't tell you what that is, but ultimately, you've got a situation where the expectation on Greece is that it'll meet its obligations to the IMF, and it's not doing that. And so you only have a range of options. You can sort of pick your poison, but the status quo can't stay here because they either need to meet their obligations and meet their commitments, or Europe needs to let them off the hook, or they need to find some other compromise, or there has to be a parting of the ways. I mean, there's in the end not that many options.
Prime Minister, on Nauru, the Foreign Minister hopes to meet with the government in Sydney.
Yep.
This week, Australia spends about 10 times as much on aid as New Zealand does, not to mention the $400 million they spend on that detention centre.
Yeah.
Would it be more helpful if the Australian government combined with the New Zealand government considered their aid to Nauru?
Well, ours is a bit more specific because I think it's in the judicial system. I had a discussion with the Foreign Minister about that over the weekend. He is obviously going to raise, as you quite correctly pointed out, later in the week. And we're not ruling out the fact that we won't change what we're doing. So a coordinated, I don't know if we need to be absolutely coordinated in what we do, but a response from both Australia and New Zealand will be beneficial. Certainly what we see taking place up there is worrying to us.
Would you consider using the Security Council? There is a focus on the Pacific when using the presidency.
that hasn't been the advice I've had from the Foreign Minister over the weekend. At this stage, we think it's somewhat off that, but the first instance is to raise our points with them, put some pressure on them.
The financial markets authorities have seeking settlement. Are you encouraged that they seem to be taking some, or getting some results, if some could say?
Yeah, I think look, it'll be some comfort, not a lot, to hand over investors, but at least those directors have been found held accountable, and the settlement, I think, was 18 million, so it's not insignificant.
Does that set the right incentives though, that they're cutting deals with these directors, not accepting any liability? I mean, the regulator when it was first set up was to be a super regulator. I mean, are these setting the right incentives for financial market participants?
I'm a bit reluctant to sort of critique, what ultimately they decide to do, because they have, full access to all of the information, and they can model, how likely they think they'll be successful or whatever. But I think it just reflects the practicality of what was available to them. They do have very wide-ranging powers, and those powers obviously take, someone along the line take criminal action if and when the case can be decided. But I think it is also appropriate those financial penalties are there.
Have we learnt the lessons from the era of the finance companies that caused so much pain for a lot of investors?
We're much better regulated now. I think that's the big difference. Those finance companies essentially sat outside the level of regulation that they currently have, and that would at least help. But is there risk? There's just always risk that a financial institution offers much higher interest rates than other people, other financial institutions, and people just don't understand the level of risk that they're undertaking.
Some might argue that the Auckland housing market's got a little bit of a look about it, where people are flooding in for investments.
Well, that's why I always try and say to people that it's not always just a one-way bet. That people just need to be conscious of the fact. I mean, look, if you take dairy prices as a good example, you can roll the clock back to about a year ago, but I think there were plenty of people running around when the payout was $8.40 saying this is going to go on forever. Now we're down at $4.40 and people are saying it, it's kind of the beginning of the end. Truth is that, commodity prices, exchange rate, asset prices, they all move around a bit. The big lesson I think for any investor though is to take advice, and if something looks too good to be true, it probably is.
You said last year that currency could get to 65 cents. We're almost there now.
I saw you quoting me on the weekend. I was very grateful that you noted that down. I look forward to Mr. Dan playing his footage he's got in the can at some point just to vindicate that prediction. Although I do get slapped around when I say something.
It goes under though, would you explain?
Well, no, well, God, neither would I.
So does it look about right now?
Oh, look, I think at the time actually the real question you asked me was what's the equilibrium rate for New Zealand? And I just said, look, the Goldilocks rate's probably considerably away from where we are. I don't know. I think one thing I do think is that those external stabilising factors, if you like, exchange rates, interest rates, they do provide a very important function in keeping our economy in check. I mean, if you're an exporter, for instance, to Australia, it wasn't that long ago we were, literally at parity. Now it's say 88, 89 cents. Life is a lot easier at 88, 89 cents. Even for for many other exporters, obviously in US dollars, life is vastly different at 68 cents or 69 cents than it was at say 88 cents. So we just need that floating exchange rate to provide that buffer, if you like, really, really important part of stimulus.
Will it make life harder for consumers?
Yeah, a little bit at the margins. Obviously, potential risk is imported inflation, also higher prices for some of the things that we just can't avoid importing, and that are everyday consumable items that you just simply need. Petrol being a good example of that.
Prime Minister, are you concerned about this cashed out charter school funding model, given that millions of dollars aren't actually being spent on their intended purpose, and instead incur an interest in bank?
I haven't had a really good look at it, so just to preface it by simply saying that I suspect that there are timing issues in terms of what they're doing, because we pay essentially on students that are there, and we pay sometimes on the establishment, which is equivalent establishment costs that we anticipate a normal state school would be. So if it's sitting cashed up, I suspect because it's waiting for those investments to be undertaken. But you really need to ask your parata.
If that collapsed in the meantime, would the government have recourse, would be able to get their money back, or would it have no recourse?
there are legal contracts that are established, and it would depend on the contract.
Just with Iraq, have there been, in Australia they're talking about talks with the US about their role evolving. Is that similar, are those similar talks being held in the US?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, you'd have to ask the CDF whether there are discussions with him, but or the Minister's office, but not with me.
Right, so there's no sense that their role there might be fluid and could change over time.
Well, it's probably the opposite. I've tried to be as clear as I can be. I think, we're in Taji for 2 years. We're undertaking that function. It's the right thing for us to do, in my view. But there's a very finite time period, and there's a very finite set of activities I want our people engaged in.
Will you discuss issues like that with the United States Admiral that is...
Harry Harris, I'm seeing him after this. I've no doubt there'll be just sort of general discussion on what's happening there. He's the new Admiral for PACOM, I think, so been talking about his activities and what's happening.
Just can I just ask you about another thing? Your trip to Samoa for the rugby game. Are you taking over some rugby balls or something?
I think, funny enough, my office asked me if I don't want to get in front of Labour's announcement, but it's nothing really to do with us. They just advised me. But my understanding is that someone produced a whole lot of rugby balls. They had a spelling mistake in them, so they couldn't use them. Labour were aware of it, and they've organised the balls to be taken to Samoa to be given away. But it's really nothing to do with me.
Did Cabinet sorry.
Other than, it's on the 757, that's it.
Did Cabinet discuss the Resource Management Act changes today, and are you going to split it into 2 bills?
Cabinet didn't discuss it.
Cabinet Committee?
Cabinet Committee did discuss it. No, I don't think we're going to split it into 2 bills. What's happening at the moment, if I was to sort of cut to the chase, is that we need to get PCO to draft the bill, because to actually see whether our partners will support it, they are saying, look, you need to actually show me the drafted legislation. So what we're really doing at the moment is, outside of a sort of more broader discussion, really getting in the position where PCO can draft it. That's months away really, it takes a few months to do that. Then we'll be in a position to either have a discussion with our partners, talk about what the bill might look like, or what you want to do with it. At this point it's one bill, and essentially consider whether we'd have an exposure draft or not.
Because there was some suggestion that you might be able to split off, say, the housing issues, which have got very broad public support, political support, but maybe focus on those alternatives to modifying 6 and 7 that maybe are more contentious. Would you not think about doing that?
Well, I'm not going to 100% rule that out, because there's certainly 1 or 2 ministers that think there's some merit in that argument of saying, maybe infrastructure development or regional development or housing. There are arguments about saying you could have a number of bills, but at this point that's not how Nick's getting PCO to draft it, and we haven't had a serious discussion about that. So it's just an idea that's, I think 1 or 2 people could see some merit for exactly the point you're making, that it might be possible to get broader parliamentary support for one element of it. So maybe we just vote on that. If we do it in a couple of parts, you might get broader support, but we'll see.
There are signs that gay marriage is gaining momentum in Australia. You talked about the strength of tourism here in New Zealand. Any chance you're worried about there being less gay tourists to New Zealand as a result?
I'm not worried about it, but look, it's for Australians to decide whether they want to vote for gay marriage, but the experience in New Zealand I think has been a positive one. Okay. That's all of the stuff.